Distinguished guests, our event is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to first UK-China horse racing industry webinar. I'm Jason Lee from DIT China and the host of today's webinar. This is an important moment for the UK-China horse racing industry's cooperation. Why? As I remember, the last time UK-China has official engagement on horse racing, and that was 8 years ago. I would like to thank BHA, Great British Racing International, the Jockey Club, and the Chinese Equestrian Association and the CBBC for their support. Otherwise, we would need to wait for another 8 years to sit together. Today, the government, federation, and industry from both countries gathered together online, and both are eager to share the experience and work together in this uncertain and challenging time. This is very inspiring, as you have already seen the agenda of today's webinar, and I won't repeat here, but I'm just going to share with you some highlights. The first one, we have simultaneous interpretation today. Please choose the language channel by pressing the button on the bottom of your screen. If you have any question throughout the webinar, please feel free to share the questions with us through the Q&A function of Zoom. And third, please scan the QR code on your bottom right screen corner to send your information. And we are happy to help you to reach out to the British counterparts, and we are also going to make brochures of the UK side so that you feel free to reach out to them. Now we'd like to invite Mr. Tom Duke, the Deputy HMTC from British Embassy, to give us a welcome speech.
Thank you very much, Jason. Good afternoon to friends and colleagues who are here in China, like myself, and also good morning to people joining from the UK. My name is Tom Duke. I'm the Deputy Trade Commissioner to China based in the British Embassy in Beijing. I'm very pleased to be part of this webinar today, and again, I'd like to welcome everybody. I hope it's a very useful session for you. Our role here in China is, of course, to promote the British sports industry, particularly the horse racing sector here today, and also to work with our Chinese partners, whether it's in government, in industry associations, individual companies, or whoever, to help the development of the Chinese sector. The horse racing industry in the UK has a very long history. Indeed, horse racing itself goes back centuries, perhaps even further, and holds a very special place within British culture and throughout large portions of the British population. Pre the pandemic, it was an incredibly popular sport and pastime, with people going to racecourses across the country. This, of course, has taken a bit of a hit over the past year and a half, but I hope that the strength and the popularity of the horse racing sector in the UK will mean that it will be well placed to bounce back once the economic recovery continues further. The UK sector, the horse racing sector in the UK, given this sort of deep-rooted popularity and important place in UK culture, has developed some world-leading expertise really throughout the entire sector, whether that's on breeding, training of the horses, shipping, auctions, management and operation of the site, indeed the more commercial aspects around race days. All of these things and more, the UK is one of the leading places in the entire world. We have followed with interest in the UK the development and the thinking behind and the planning behind the development of horse racing in China. Now, China, of course, has different elements of culture and different views, different perspectives towards horse racing, perhaps, than the UK. But China, of course, also has a very long history with horses and with horse racing as well. And we in the UK are very keen to support the further development of the Chinese sector. And I'm very pleased that we have a number of colleagues on the line today from the Chinese General Administration of Sport and the Chinese Equestrian Association, and look forward to hearing some updates there. And I'd like to assure you that you have the support of myself and my colleagues in the embassy, and indeed, I believe the entire UK sector, to help to help to implement these plans as you go forward over the coming years. And we have some of the leading authorities, some leading experts from the UK sector here to share thoughts and information with you here today, including from the British Horse Racing Authority and Great British Racing International, and slightly later on in the programme, of course, the Jockey Club and Weatherby's as well. So I hope that these bring a number of experts, a number of perspectives for you that are useful. And I encourage our friends and colleagues from China to be sort of open and frank and to ask as many questions as necessary from our British colleagues. I certainly look forward to participating in further work in this area. We hope that this is the first of many activities during this year. So I'd be very interested in your feedback after the session as to what you might find useful over the coming months and indeed years, especially things that we can do now whilst international travel is challenging, particularly utilising perhaps the platform we provide in the embassy for engagement here within China, but also longer term. Which elements of the UK sector do we think are most useful for China and could potentially be part of the growth of the industry in China, because that is absolutely what we are trying to achieve. So thank you very much again for joining. I really do hope this is an interesting session for you, and I look forward to hearing some of the comments and questions as we go throughout today's program. Thank you.
非常感谢 Tom Duke 的精彩
Thank
支
you
持。
very much, Mr. Tom Duke.
相信在两国政府的
For
支
the
持下，
opening
我
remarks,
们
we
中
do
英两
believe
国的
that
赛
with the
马的
support
交流
of
与合作
both
会
of our
越来越多。
governments, we are
去
going
年
to
呢，
have
中国
more
两
and
部委
more
发布了
cooperations
国家
in
马
horse
产业发展
racing
规划
sports.
2020到
Last year,
2025。
we have seen
那
the
么如今
2020
中
to
国赛马产业
2025
的发
horse
展如
racing
何？
industry
未来的发展目标又是什么呢？
development
下面我们
plan
有
and
请
what is
中国
going
马
to
术
be
协
the
会商务部部长陈
future
九进部长
development
为我们
goals,
详
as
细介
well
绍
as
一
the
下。
current status of the
谢谢。
industry in China. We'd like to have Mr. Chen Jiuqing, head of commerce from the Chinese Equestrian Association. Distinguished leaders, dear friends in the horse racing industry, good morning, good afternoon. I'm honored to be here to make a speech about the current situation and the development goals of horse racing in China on behalf of the Chinese Equestrian Association, CEA. First of all, we'd like to express our sincere gratitude to the British Embassy in Beijing, the Department for International Trade, and the British Horse Racing Authority, as well as the Great British Racing International and CPBC for their support. As a member of All China Sports Federation, the CEA is a national sports association acknowledged by the Chinese Olympic Committee. In 1982, it became an official member of the International Equestrian Federation. Since then, it has been the only official organization representing China in various international equestrian events. Looking back during nearly 40 years since the CEA joined FEI, China's equestrian industry and modern horse racing have been developing rapidly. There are increasing professionals engaged in vocations related to horse racing, and the value of the equestrian industry and related industries have also seen year-on-year growth. The development of horse racing industry in China has greatly contributed to the growth of the equine industry chain and enhanced the international influence of some of the cities in China. Classic racing events such as Wuhan International Horse Racing Festival and the National Equestrian Competition in Inner Mongolia played important roles in promoting the city's exchange with the rest of the world. The economic hotspots generated by horse racing have also attracted other cities' attention, which has directly facilitated the horse racing industry's development in China. In 2020, China Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs and the General Administration of Sport of China issued relevant policy guidelines and national equestrian industry development plan, which states that China will promote horse racing sports, establishing a grading system for events, meeting international standards, and improving the national horse racing event system. These policies strongly boosted the development of domestic horse racing. Nowadays, horse racing has become an important part of China's sports industry as it promotes the growth of the Chinese equine industry, enriches the sports industry, and satisfies the public's diversified sports needs. Under the guidance of the General Administration of Sport of China, in recent years, the CEA has made great efforts to develop horse racing and achieved fruitful results. First, as of 2020, a great deal of provinces and cities in China have been vigorously developing horse racing events. The number of horse racing clubs in China is on the rise each year. The registration of race horses and prize money amount of racing events are also on the rise year on year. Racing events held in Wuhan, Hubei province, and Inner Mongolia have been quite well known across China, directly bringing huge economic benefits to horse racing and related industries. The CEA held a series of events such as Grand Prix, a championship tournament, open cultural contest of China flat racing, China flat racing tournament, and open horse racing, the racing championship race series, and the flat racing tournament and open horse racing annual finals have become the most influential and attractive top-level professional events. Second, as one of the traditional sports and cultural activities in China, modern horse racing has been developing for more than 20 years in China, but the event system has not been fully established yet. To facilitate the healthy and sustainable development of horse racing and improving the expertise of practitioners in this industry, the CEA has launched a series of talent training and cooperated with research institutions and universities to conduct theoretical and scientific research for China's development of horse racing in recent years. To further promote domestic horse racing, on November 27, 2020, the CEA established a CEA Horse Racing Committee, which certainly lays the foundation for the long-term development of China's horse racing. Upon its establishment, the committee has taken rapid actions to implement its strategy to reach its goals. It revised the horse racing rules of the Chinese Equestrian Association, as well as formulated and issued the horse racing administration measures of the Chinese Equestrian Association and the technical standards for Chinese horse racing, providing a robust guarantee for the standardized development of horse racing in China. Third, the CEA will make overall planning on the basis of existing events. First, in terms of the CEA will focus on relevant policies such as Healthy China 2030 and outline for building a leading sports nation to develop horse racing and promote equine culture in China. The CEA will make overall planning on basis of existing events. Firstly, in terms of event classification, the CEA will adopt a systematic method to classify international, domestic, and local racing events and formulate administrative measures, including those for event grading and points system. Second, regarding horse racing training, the CEA will carry out training for certification of horse racing professionals and strive to build an industry leading racing event system with explicit grading standards and well-rounded rules. By holding racing events, the CEA will revitalize the horse racing industry and make a special horse racing development plan based on China's national conditions. We will develop standard and mature brand events and gradually increase rewards for those events. We plan to improve horse racing competition rules, formulate corresponding technological standards, and standardize the Chinese horse racing event system. Horse racing in China is still in its infancy. We hope that China and the UK will have more opportunities to cooperate in various fields through the exchange between our two countries' sports industries. contributing to the collective prosperity of the equine industry of the two parties. We are sincerely looking forward to support and value advice from horse racing experts around the world. Thank you very much. So we'd like to thank Mr. Chen Jiuqing for the introduction, so that we have a brief background knowledge of China's equine industry. And I think this has a lot to do with international cooperation. The next session is from the UK side. We are very honored to have the representatives from GBRI and BHA to share from the British side the development and the situation of horse racing in the UK. Now, Anna-Marie, you can start.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Mr. Duke and Mr. Chen for their opening remarks. I'm delighted to address this important webinar as chair of the British Horse Racing Authority, the governing and regulatory body for thoroughbred horse racing in Great Britain. British Racing greatly values our partnership with the UK government. The organisation of this webinar is just one example of the depth of this relationship, which goes from strength to strength. From my experience as the Vice Chair of the British Olympic Association and as former Chair of British Rowing, I have worked with Mr. Quanhai Li and Mr. Wang Shi on water sport development in China, and was pleased to see the opening of the Nanchang Rowing Centre near Shanghai very recently. I look forward to the opportunities which a similar partnership in horse racing can bring. British thoroughbred racing and breeding is an international leader. From the quality of our bloodstock to the expertise of our participants and the care that we provide for our horses throughout their lives. Our industry has noted with great interest the launch of the National Equine Industry Development Plan. We very much admire the ambition behind it and the aims to grow equestrian competition and breeding in China. I firmly believe that by working together and building on the principle that the welfare of the thoroughbred comes first, our industries can collectively prosper. The next 2 days mark the start of this process, as you hear from world leaders in the fields of regulation, breeding, training, and education, all based in Britain. It is a fascinating programme, and I hope that you will very much enjoy it. I look forward to building on our partnership in the months ahead. I would now like to hand over to Minty Farquhar, Acting General Manager of the Great British Racing International, who's worked extremely hard to arrange such a fascinating webinar programme. Minty will outline more about the opportunities for partnership between our two nations.
Thank you, Anna-Marie, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone attending this two-part webinar. I would like to start by thanking the British Embassy and the Department for International Trade in Beijing for approaching British Racing with the proposal for a webinar event subsequent to the publication of China's Equine Industry Development Plan. I also add my thanks to Mr. Chen and the Chinese Equestrian Association for their support of this event. As a world leader in thoroughbred horse racing for over 300 years, the British racing industry boasts a wealth of knowledge and expertise, as well as thoroughbred bloodlines that can help to shape a sport globally. And we are delighted to be invited to share some insights with those involved in the growing sport of horse racing in China. Across the 2 days, you will hear from various speakers whose organizations, expertise, services, and products can be called upon to aid the development of the horse racing industry in China. From racecourse and training facility development to administrational services, and from workforce training programs to horse transportation. In part 2 of this webinar tomorrow, you will also get an insight into the management of and support for thoroughbred breeding and the practice of purchasing bloodstock at Tattersalls. Anna-Marie also mentioned the welfare of the horse and the horse coming first in British racing. We believe that exceptional standards of care are fundamental to the longevity of a horse racing industry. As such, you will also hear from veterinary professionals whose expertise it is absolutely vital we call upon in the development of any links between British racing and international jurisdictions. The organisations involved in this webinar event will welcome discussions around collaborations in the coming years. And to that end, you are being provided with contact details in an e-brochure, as well as on the speaker's presentation slides. On an individual level, Great British Racing International remains on hand to assist you if you want to explore buying, owning, breeding, and sponsoring in Britain over the coming months and years. But today we are here to hear from British Racing's experts. So without further ado, I would like to thank you for your attendance and to introduce the first speaker, Andrew Howell, the BHA's Head of Regulation, who will give an introduction to regulating the sport of horse racing.
Apologies if you can now hear. Thank you, Minty. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Andrew Howell. I am the BHA's Head of Regulation. I'm a lawyer by trade, having worked in private legal practice before joining the BHA, and that is an indication of the quite considerable legal focus to the role that the regulation team plays on behalf of the BHA. And so what I intend to do over the next 15 minutes is to expand on that and firstly tell you about our team, before then talking about our team's main functions, namely our responsibility for the rules of racing, how the rules are drafted or amended, and how they are applied. And then to talk about the prosecutorial aspect of our role, the team being responsible for any matter that goes before the BHA's independent judicial panel. So let's start with the people within the team, because it's important to look at what skills help the regulation team to function effectively. What are the necessary expertise? How is the team comprised? As you'll see from the slide on screen now, the regulation team is in fact split into two halves. One half is the disciplinary team, which is comprised of team members with quite considerable racing experience, often from a racing background. For example, it's essential that the disciplinary team can read a race, that they understand the intricacies of racing, while still requiring the regulatory experience and training in order to fulfill that role. The reason for that skill set is because the disciplinary team's main focus is to deal with any regulatory issues that arise from the racecourse. And it's therefore imperative that they are skilled and think in a similar manner to the race day stewards. The race day stewards being the BHA's regulatory eyes and ears on the racecourse. However, they're not part of the regulation team, they sit separately. And so the kinds of cases that the disciplinary team will deal with include appeals from the racecourse, or cases that the stewards refer to the disciplinary team because the matter is too complex to deal with on the racecourse, or because the stewards don't have enough time to deal with it on the racecourse. The disciplinary team's caseload can therefore be quite time sensitive because racing is fast moving with multiple fixtures every single day in Britain. So the possibility of a suspension for a jockey must be dealt with and resolved quickly. So that's the disciplinary team, one half of regulation. And the other half of regulation is the compliance team. This team is comprised of lawyers with legal experience because matters they deal with are often away from the racecourse, and so specific racing knowledge is not as crucial. The kinds of cases they deal with would be corruption, betting, equine anti-doping, human anti-doping, and welfare safeguarding cases. The key difference between compliance and disciplinary is the manner in which things are referred to the team, whereas disciplinary work with the stewards, compliance work with the integrity team, who are responsible for investigating certain issues. And investigations can sometimes be lengthy. They can take months or years. And so the same time pressures don't necessarily exist for compliance as they do for disciplinary. However, complex legal issues can arise in these cases, such as disclosure obligations or problems with witnesses, which is why, firstly, they can take longer, and secondly, the legal knowledge and experience is important. So that's the team. Collectively, we're the regulation team. And at the outset, I said that the team is responsible for the BHA's rules of racing. So let's look at that. The BHA is the sole regulator of horse racing in Great Britain. The BHA therefore has to have the ability to regulate effectively, and the rules are our power. The importance of ensuring that the rules are clear, unambiguous, easy to understand, and fair is imperative. The reason that it's imperative is to ensure that they do what we want them to do. For example, when you've spent 2 years building a case, building a corruption case, for example, you want to be able to charge, hold accountable every person involved in that corrupt activity. You want the rule to stand up to scrutiny. You want the appropriate sanctions to apply if people are found guilty. And so to do that, the rules must be carefully worded, they cannot be overly prescriptive, and they must be as succinct as possible. And if they aren't, then even if you win the case, you run losing the matter under an appeal because of a misapplication of the rules or an abusive process. A few examples of our rules are on screen now, and to pick one for discussion, number 19 on the right-hand side of the page is a particularly interesting one because it's notable for its broadness. It reads, a person must not engage in conduct which the BHA considers is prejudicial to the integrity, proper conduct, or good reputation of horse racing. It's notable because it may become a relevant rule in many number of circumstances, and that's intentional. It needs to be applied to a many number of different cases. For example, the person may be in breach of this rule if they say something inappropriate on television, that being the reputational aspect, or if they have attempted to do something underhanded to another person, that being the integrity aspect. That is the BHA's rule that's equivalent to what other sports may call bringing the sport into disrepute. And it's a crucial rule for any sports governing body to have. Some of the rules you'll see on screen perhaps lack certain detail. For example, the rule we just looked at, what is proper conduct? To assist with the application of these rules, the BHA produces codes of conduct, guidance, and procedures about how the rules should be applied. But that guidance doesn't sit within the rules, it sits elsewhere. And so it's worth pointing out that the regulation team is also responsible for certain things that sit outside of the rules, such as general instructions or operating procedures for racecourses. Such procedures may still be mandatory obligations because the rules say, for example, generally speaking, the operating procedures must be complied with, but all of that information, such as what constitutes an operating procedure, sits somewhere else. And helpfully, that means that you can change those requirements as frequently as you need to without having to make a rule change, because a rule change is not a straightforward process. And the link to those documents that I've just mentioned are at the bottom of the slide. So having mentioned a rule change, how are the rules drafted? How are the rules changed? And how are new rules introduced? Well, the introduction of a new rule at the BHA must go through a set process. It's a fair and transparent process before it can come into existence. A basic 5-step chronology is on screen now. That job, number 1, looking into the necessity or reasonableness of a new rule, the proposal for change, doesn't necessarily sit with the regulation team. That will sit with the team that wants to introduce the rule. A consultation will usually be conducted to include the people affected, the affected stakeholders, which is required to allow the industry to have its say on the proposal. Then, with the industry's feedback to hand, the decision on whether to bring a rule into existence will go through a 2-part test before being implemented, which, as you'll see, is dependent on approval by an independent rules committee and then approval by the BHA's board, Anna Marie, for example. The regulation team will assist with that process, such as drafting the rule, liaising with the rules committee, and liaising with the BHA's board, and lead on the actual implementation of the rule. That process, though, can take a considerable amount of time. However, it is a process that protects the interests of all parties who are affected by whatever change is being proposed. So we have our rules. In summary, our job in that regard is to ensure that they're fit for purpose. Now we have to apply them. And the regulation team's main day-to-day responsibility, therefore, is to uphold those rules, which often involves prosecuting participants who act in breach of the rules when there's a public interest to do so. And key to that is to apply the rules in a fair, transparent, and consistent manner. That is to say that we are not prosecuting to win at all costs. We are trying to get to the bottom of whatever's happened, of whether there's a breach. And if so, seek the appropriate penalty, whether that be a fine, a suspension, or a disqualification. So how do we do that? Well, the regulation team must follow the evidence. The BHA has an incredible in-house integrity team who has an abundance of intelligence that we can use. The working relationship between integrity and regulation is very close, and you'll hear from my colleague Chris next about the integrity team. But the regulation team, my team, is responsible for considering all of that information and evidence compiled by the integrity team and deciding whether there should be a charge. In doing so, we're transparent. We have a disclosure policy that's quite unique to sports law, which is based on the English criminal law standard. And we go further than any other British sport with our disclosure obligations. And we have accountability. All charges must be approved by the BHA's independent disciplinary officer, whose job it is to ensure that the BHA is acting within its powers. So he can refuse a proposed charge, and he sits completely separately from the regulation team. And so acting fairly, consistently, and transparently is a common theme throughout the disciplinary process. That doesn't in any way mean that we go easy on people who are under investigation or who are subject to a prosecution, but we must ensure that the process is legally robust to avoid a prosecution falling through on procedural grounds. And so we ensure that we are compliant with the legal principles in our own jurisdiction. So I've talked about the rules of racing, how they are created and changed, and how those rules are applied and how we prosecute. But I suppose the question is, how are these cases heard? How is it decided whether a person has committed an offence? Let's take a betting corruption case as an example. Such a case would have been investigated by the integrity team and all of that information passed to my team, the regulation team. We would put that evidence into a presentable format. So witness statements, reports, graphs, diagrams, timelines. That evidence would then be served on the accused, who would respond before the matter goes to a disciplinary hearing. And hearings take place in the BHA's head office in London. And we have a hearing room with television screens and audio recording equipment. And all matters are heard by a panel of 3 people, again, independent of the BHA, one of which is legally qualified. He's the chairman, or she's the chairman, and 2 wingers with racing experience. The pool of panel members, where these 3 individuals are selected from, have a mixture of racing expertise, whether it be experience in training racehorses, riding horses, medical, or betting. And I recommend you read the Quinlan report for more information on why the disciplinary is constituted in this way. It's on the slide on screen now, or a link to the Quinlan report is on screen now. And the hearings themselves are conducted as if they are a legal hearing, similar to an arbitration. However, rather than being governed by the law of the land, they're governed by the BHA's own procedural rules, which sit within the rules of racing and are applied entirely at the discretion of the chairman. The chairman has great power and can issue directions or orders to allow the disciplinary process to move forward effectively. And during the hearing, the BHA and the accused will present their cases. Hearings can last hours or days, depending on their complexity. And a decision is ideally made on the day. But if it's complex, then it may take a few days. But either way, the panel must produce their written reasons justifying their decision. And this is all in the public domain, so the media can attend the hearings and the decision and reasons are released publicly. And so that is a quick overview of the regulation team and our functions. We're responsible for some other areas such as training and legal advice, but I think our main focus is on the rules and how they are applied. And on screen now are some hopefully useful links about everything that I've spoken about. And of course, feel free to contact me with any questions. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy, very much for such an insightful introduction into the regulation of horse racing. We now move on to integrity. And for this, I hand over to Chris Watts, who is the Head of Integrity Assurance at the BHA. Over to you, Chris.
Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you, Minty, and Andy, thank you for your kind words about the integrity team. So I'm now going to take you through the integrity department, the teams that make up the department, our role and our priorities. Can you see my screen?
Not yet, Chris.
Okay, let's see if I can.
Yeah, you're on.
We're on. Okay, excellent. Okay, so just a very brief introduction. I was a police officer and senior detective in the Metropolitan Police in London as my main career, with extensive experience in intelligence handling, covert policing methods, and the investigation of serious crime. I left policing and went to work for the England and Wales Cricket Board for 6 years as the head of anti-corruption. And then I came to work for the British Horseracing Authority in 2017 as the head of integrity. I must say I feel extremely privileged to lead what I consider to be the most interesting area of work within the British Horseracing Authority. Some may say I would say that. I just talked very briefly about our mission as the Integrity Department and what we bring to the British Horseracing Authority and British Racing. The objective of the teams that make up the department is to ensure that racing is, and more importantly, is seen to be by fans and spectators, fair and clean. That the spectacle is honest competition. That the horse and the jockey race to the best of their abilities to achieve the best possible position in the race. Breaches of the rules of racing are dealt with appropriately, proportionately, fairly and effectively, and Andy's given you a great insight into regulation. By striving to deliver these overarching objectives, we aim to maintain and grow the trust and the confidence in British racing, and thereby preserve the reputation of the British Horseracing Authority. That's quite a busy slide I put up for you there, but the facts and figures which are provided within the slide just give you an idea of the breadth of the racing industry in Britain, in which integrity staff have to operate and to deliver the highest standards of integrity and regulation. Integrity risks can come from any part of this industry, and our job is to identify them, investigate them appropriately, and do our best to prevent them happening again. And the picture there that you see on the right-hand side is from Cheltenham last year. And in fact, last week was the Cheltenham Festival in Britain, where we had quite a robust integrity presence. This slide just talks, identifies to you the rules of racing. I won't go into these because Andy has given a very good explanation of what they're about. But the rules of racing is what governs and regulates the way that our sport is conducted. And it's suspected breaches of these rules and these codes that we have to identify and investigate to gather the evidence to then pass that to the regulatory team. So I think this is probably the most important part of my presentation, is to talk to you about who we are as a department and what are our team responsibilities within that department. And at the head, at the top of the list, I've put intelligence, because the gathering of intelligence is critical to us achieving our objectives, so that we can try to understand the threats and the risks to the sport. Hence the jigsaw puzzle, because we're trying to collect as much intelligence as we can so that we can create the picture and fully understand what is going on within our sport. We use intelligence to inform all of our resourcing decisions. We have a confidential intelligence system within which we store all of our intelligence. It is very similar to a police system. It's based on a police system and has different levels of restricted access. Much of the information that we collect is highly sensitive and personal, so we are extremely careful in how we handle it and manage it. Our intelligence system effectively joins together all of our team's activities. Within our intelligence area, we have a development team, including trained analysts that work with the intelligence reports in order to identify threats and potential breaches of the rules of racing. Searching and analysing social media is extremely helpful to us, and our analysts are trained in this particular area of intelligence collection and development. We have dedicated reporting points so that intelligence can be provided to us through different mediums. We use an external company as an independent third party, so that those people that wish to provide intelligence to us with anonymity, they can do that. We have a weekly, monthly, 6-monthly meeting structure in order to discuss, consider and agree emerging risks and decide on appropriate interventions. We work to a control strategy and a risk register to ensure that we focus on identified and agreed priorities. The biggest challenge is getting our participants to trust us and provide information to us as the regulator, because the participants within the sport are the people that truly and really know what is going on. Information sharing is very important to us as well. We have developed a broad range of trusted partnerships with organisations that can assist us to protect the integrity of British racing. And some of those bodies we have formalised information sharing agreements with. As I'm sure you would imagine, betting companies are the most obvious and the most frequently used organisations that we share information with. And in this country, I'm very pleased to say that we have very good relationships with our betting companies, and provide them the legal gateways there, we will share information with them, and vice versa. Also, we talk to law enforcement bodies, animal welfare organisations, and we meet very regularly with other sports governing bodies over here in the UK. Licensing. The licensing function is effectively the gateway into the sport for those who wish to become participants. The licensing team is critical for making decisions on who comes into our sport and who doesn't. Responsibilities include considering, issuing, renewing and refusing licenses, as well as applying conditions where appropriate. License roles include, for example, jockeys and trainers, but also owners, riders' agents and valets. Currently, licenses only last for 12 months, and suitability checks are carried out on all applicants. License holders are obliged to report to us any changes in their circumstances which may well affect suitability considerations. The stable inspection team work very closely with the licensing team. They're responsible for inspecting and maintaining standards within the training environment through a regular program of inspections and of application of risk levels and risk categories. They will inspect all new and existing training establishments, principally to ensure the highest standards of equine welfare for our thoroughbreds is maintained. However, it's much wider than that for stable inspectors, because they will assist investigations that are conducted or linked to a training establishment, and they develop very close relationships and knowledge of particular trainers. We have a racing and bet monitoring team. So this is a team of people who are extremely experienced in racing, but also have extensive knowledge into the betting industry. They monitor betting patterns of the higher risk races and the higher risk meetings. They work very closely with betting operators, and some of them have worked in that environment before coming to work for racing. They look for unusual betting activities, and they will try to find explanations. They're in very regular and close liaison with our race day steward teams, because we monitor our racing and we monitor the betting in live time. And when explanations for unusual betting activities cannot be assured, this is then fed into our intelligence system, which is when our analysts and our development team kick into action and work with that intelligence in order to try to establish the facts and the truth. Jockey drug testing. We are responsible for all race day, out of competition, and target testing of jockeys. This involves working with a toxicology company, booking of sample collections, and managing the results. Some of those results will lead through to investigations, which will then lead to a case being developed and then passed to our regulatory team for the prosecutorial process. Investigations, we have a dedicated team of investigators who have a very broad range of previous backgrounds, including not just police, but within the team itself, experience from immigration, from racing, from working in equine yards, revenue and customs, and the betting industry. We average something like between 70 to 80 investigations per year. And currently we're on number 23 for this year, and we haven't got to the end of March yet. So this year is looking like it could be quite a busy year. Just some examples of the types of investigations that we conduct will include horse welfare, jockey and equine drugs positives, staff behaviour and welfare, safeguarding matters, suspicious betting, and leaking or breaching of inside information. We have a number of projects that we have underway at any one time which have an integrity focus on them. Just some examples of current projects that we're looking at is the potential for the examination of mobile communication devices, the review of racecourse CCTV, principally because of the work that we do within the stable environment on a race day within the racecourse. And we also conduct due diligence checks on all high profile appointments within the BHA. That gives you a bit of an insight into the way that the integrity department is made up, our responsibilities, what we deliver to British Racing, and my contact details are on the slide. If you ever want to talk to me, or contact me, or have any questions, or anything you want to talk about in a bit more depth, please feel free to contact me at any time. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Chris. Turning our attention now to the races themselves. we hear from Paul Johnson, who is the BHA's Head of Racing. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Minty. I will just share my screen. There we go. I hope you can all see that. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Paul Johnson. I'm the Head of Racing and Racecourse at the BHA. I head up a team responsible for the creation and publication of the British Fixture List and Race Programme. In the coming 15 minutes, I will try to give a brief overview of the way that we operate and why we do so in both of these areas. If there is time left at the end of the presentation, I will endeavour to answer any questions that you may have then. I see that the Zoom's Q&A facility is also being used, and I've also added my email address in the slides, so I'm happy to try to answer any questions via either of these channels at the end of the presentation. To begin then, the fixture list. It's agreed each year between three parties responsible for decision making in British racing: the BHA, racecourses and horsemen. The latter is a collective group comprising owners, trainers, jockeys, breeders and stable staff. The fixture list itself has significant commercial implications, including revenue from race day attendances, hospitality income, picture and data rights and betting revenues. For this reason, it's of great importance to all parties that the eventual outcome is right for the sport, so we work to four key objectives. We aim to provide a fixture list that is optimised for consumers, i.e. the individuals who enjoy watching racing and attending the sport. For the media, those responsible for the broadcasting of racing to those consumers. For participants, including trainers, jockeys and stable staff, and finally, for bookmakers, through where much of our sport in Britain is funded. When producing the fixture list, we're always mindful that there is a balance to be struck between the volume of fixtures and the number of runners each race will attract. For example, were we to stage too few fixtures, not only would we find that owners would become frustrated with being unable to get their horses into a race, but we'd also be failing to maximise the sport's revenues. Excuse me. Were we to stage too many races, although we would maximise immediate commercial returns, we would also run the risk of racing becoming uncompetitive and therefore unappealing to the public. In the long run, the sport could be damaged by any approach that means that consumers lose confidence, especially as some of those consumers will ultimately provide a much bigger investment into the sport by becoming an owner themselves. Ultimately, the process sees us create a fixture list under which we race 362 days per year, with races every 10 to 15 minutes for around 7 hours per day. Both flat and jump meetings take place in Britain year-round, but flat racing makes up the larger share of the fixture list and is where I will focus my discussion today. When we've established a fixture list, we begin work on creating a programme of races with which to fill the fixtures. In Britain, we normally stage 7 or 8 races per fixture, although this number does vary a great deal around the world. So let's consider where the race programme fits into the sport as a whole. The graphic here is intended to show the potential life cycle of a thoroughbred. Starting in the top left, here, we see the birth of a colt. The colt is born into the life with high standards of welfare and care. In exchange for this, he'll be raised to be a racehorse, ultimately likely to be sold at auction to go into a training facility. Soon after this point, he'll be ready for his first venture onto a racecourse, here. Where in the case of this horse, he first races as a 2-year-old before moving into his 3-year-old season. This will be his classic season, where he will have the opportunity to show his talent against the best of his generation. Horses that are capable of doing this are then tasked with the next stage of the cycle, which is to produce the next generation of talent. And this is the same horse heading off to stud. It is ever the aim that the next generation is stronger and faster than the last. The horse shown in the bottom 3 pictures here is one called Frankel, who you may have heard us mention before. He was the winner of all 14 of his races, and we liked him a lot. On this slide, I've highlighted the racecourse performances with a red outline. This is the part of the process where the race planners must set the stage upon which each horse can showcase his or her ability. This is a great responsibility if we're to ensure that the best horses can be identified through their racing performances as those to take the breed forwards in future generations. So the key objectives of the race programme. Firstly, to create a programme that provides competitive and compelling racing. Secondly, one which allows every horse to develop to the pinnacle of its potential. You'll see that the slide says that these objectives are not always complementary, and I'll explain that. It's sometimes necessary to provide less competitive opportunities to horses to develop in the early stages of their careers, so as to get the best from them in the future. We will label these races as developmental races, and I'll come back to them in later slides. Firstly, I'd like to share some of the data which underpins how we put together the programme and have the confidence that it's able to deliver for us on our objectives. So this slide shows the distribution of horses by age. It's not the sort of data that changes significantly over time, although wider economic factors are likely to have an impact. This can apply to the total number of horses in training and the distribution of those horses. For example, during our last economic downturn in 2010, we saw the number of younger horses contract first, followed by older horses. The 2019 data shows a more normal distribution of age, with the majority of horses coming into training aged 2 or 3 and gradually leaving as they age. For this reason, there are 3 distinct elements to the race programme. They are races for 2-year-olds only, races for 3-year-olds only, and then races for older horses. These can be horses aged 4 and up, or as we get further into the 3-year-old season, races for horses aged 3 and up. It's important to recognise that as horses get older and leave training, there is a need to find alternative careers for them. I understand my colleague Sally Taylor will discuss this in tomorrow's webinar. This alternative view of horses in training shows the level of ability they possess based on their highest handicap rating they achieve. The same applies here to the previous slide in that the distribution of ability is broadly similar most years. I should add that this only includes horses that have qualified for a handicap mark, something I'll cover on the next slide. Although this kind of data allows us to forecast the likely requirements of the horse population, we also aim to work in a reactive way where trainers can contact the team directly via an online forum or by the telephone. And this enables us to gather live data on any specific requirements of the horse population at any given time that may have been missed. We're then able to react and add races at short notice to ensure that those needs are serviced. So this slide shows how horses gain their first experience of racing in novice and maiden races. These are races that are designed for horses with little experience, and each horse will generally carry the same weight, subject to some caveats that I'll come back to shortly. They provide us with 2 things. Firstly, they're an opportunity for a horse to learn what it takes to be a racehorse. Earlier in the presentation, I said that I would come back to races that we would consider to be developmental ones, and these are a good example. Although we group horses together in some of these races based on their value at auction, on the whole, we're less concerned about having perfectly even matched races than we are anywhere else in the programme. The second benefit of these races is that they allow us to evaluate each horse's ability to try to ensure that in future it's qualified for races that are consistent with that ability. We wouldn't want to see a horse win future races too easily, nor would we want to see it outclassed. You may be questioning the difference between novice and maiden races, and I should explain that the only difference between race types is that the maiden races are only open to horses who have yet to win, whereas novice races may contain previous winners. One of the caveats to all horses carrying the same weight that I mentioned earlier is that previous winners are required to carry a penalty against those that have not won a race. The other caveat is that fillies receive a weight allowance against colts and geldings. So having run in 3 novice or maiden races, it's normal for horses to then be allocated a handicap rating. This is produced by our team of 12 handicappers who evaluate the performance of every runner in every race that takes place. A horse's opening rating will range from 0, essentially indicating no ability, to 140, which indicates a great deal of ability. Depending on their rating, they're likely to go on in future to run in one of the following race types. Classified races. These are level weight races at the bottom end of the ability spectrum and would normally cater for horses rated below 50. Whilst horses rated below 45 are able to take part, there is no specific programme for them as they're deemed to be below the minimum level required and will only get into races by rights if they show some improvement. Handicaps. These make up the majority of our programme and will see horses handicapped by weight to ensure that races are competitive. Handicaps are set into bands, so would, for example, put horses rated 66 to 85 together and be framed so that the higher rated horses would have to carry more weight than the lower rated ones. Each rating point equates to around 0.5 kilograms. Horses' handicap ratings will continue to change throughout their racing lifetime so as to ensure that they are always required to compete with horses of similar ability. It is this rating that is reflective of our view of their level of ability. Not all horses show their innate talent quite so early in their careers, and there will be many who progress from handicaps into the third category, pattern races. These are the level weight races, although this time they're there to cater for the best horses. They're divided into Group 1, 2 and 3, with Group 1 races being those that will see the best of each generation try to make a name for themselves and potentially define the breed for generations to come. The most famous of British pattern races is the Derby, the winner of which tends to be guaranteed a lucrative career as stud. Responsibility for British pattern races falls under the Pattern Committee. This committee is responsible for ensuring that the standard of races is maintained and that the distribution of races is optimised across the calendar. The example provided here shows how Group 1, 2 and 3 races are positioned through the schedule at middle distances. As you can see, the opportunities are spread so as to allow top-class horses to be campaigned in a way that's most suitable for them, often as they step up in distance into their 3-year-old career. Whilst it's very important to us that the top British races are able to compete effectively with races in other jurisdictions, it's also understood that it's important to collaborate with our neighbours to ensure that the best races in Europe work to complement each other. To this end, Britain is a member of the European Pattern Committee. This committee oversees the pattern of races across Europe and ensures that they are governed by a common set of rules. The graphic shown illustrates the distribution of Group 1 races across Europe, again at middle distances. It's this European-wide collaboration that provides a better spread of races than will be achieved with countries working in isolation. This has not been easy, however. Each country's race programme has both its own unique history and each country its own objectives for the future. To reach the current position has required 50 years of work from all members. Finally, there's obviously a large amount of detail involved in race planning that cannot be covered in 15 minutes, but there are 3 areas I think are sufficiently important to include today. These are opportunities by sex. We stage a separate programme for fillies and mares to encourage them to be raced so as to ensure that their ability is showcased in the same way as the colts, something that's not always been the case. Further to this, and as mentioned earlier, fillies are granted a weight allowance against colts and geldings intended to offset a degree of physical difference, on average at least. Weight for age. This sees younger horses given a weight allowance from older horses intended to reflect their lack of maturity. It's quite a detailed scale of allowances that vary by distance and time of the year, but it is necessary to enable horses to take on their seniors and be competitive. And lastly, another important consideration is meritocracy. This is key in creating a structure to the race programme that is effective and works. If we're to expect horses to develop to the best of their ability, we must offer higher financial rewards for higher level races. To this end, we publish a set of prize money values each year, which races have to meet in order to be staged. This ensures that horses aspire to be as good as they possibly can. So, to recap, I've talked today about the production of the British fixture list and race programme, and the desire to provide the stage upon which the thoroughbred can be developed to be stronger and faster in future generations. I've talked about the way we structure the programme in order to enable them to do this and how we evaluate their performances throughout their racing careers, as well as some of the allowances we offer by sex and age. I've also covered the role of the domestic and European pattern committees in maintaining the programme of the best races for the best horses. All of these ingredients are, when brought together, able to provide a stage not only to improve the breed in future, but to witness sport of the highest quality as we try to establish which is the fastest horse of each generation. That concludes my presentation. As stated at the outset, I'm happy to take any questions either via the Q&A on the Zoom call or via email if people think of any questions they'd like to ask me about the racing programme later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for that very interesting introduction to race planning. We now move away from the BHA and turn our attention to the racecourse and thoroughbred training facilities. And for that, I hand over to the Jockey Club's International Director, Stephen Wallace.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our seminar today, and I hope it is informative and useful. I'm Stephen Wallace. I'm the Jockey Club's International Director, and I've been asked to give a very brief oversight on racehorse training facilities and racecourses. Move on to the next slide, Minty, please. Newmarket is the spiritual home of horse racing throughout the world. It is a town of 20,000 people, but 3,500 horses in training, and many more located on the outskirts of the towns at stud farms as well. It takes two maps to illustrate the scale of the town. Two world-famous racecourses on the left-hand map in the July course and the Rowley Mile. 2,500 acres of manicured grassland, 50 miles of turf gallops, 14 miles of artificial all-weather gallops, 30 miles of horse walks purposely built for horses only, 3 world-class veterinary practices, the British Racing School, which you'll hear more of which tomorrow, the Tattersall Sales Complex, which you'll also hear about more tomorrow, the National Horse Racing Museum, a thriving 365-day community based around the horse with ancillary businesses like blacksmiths, etc. There are more blacksmiths in Newmarket than any other town in the country, not surprisingly. And if the town is busy, in the morning, the heath and the training grounds are a sea of tranquility, as illustrated by the two pictures at the bottom. The bottom right is significant. It's Warren Hill, world famous as one of the most ideal warm-up gallops for warm-up canters for horse anywhere in the world. Not everywhere is like Newmarket, as we see in the next slide. This is the three main pictures here are of the Miho Training Center in Tokyo, near Tokyo, home to 2,300 horses. It has barns, veterinary facilities, equine swimming pools, a racing school, all located very close to each other, unlike in Newmarket. There are a whole range of gallops on the two different training grounds, the big ovals you see on the left-hand picture. But there is no racing in Miho, it is just for training. Those training grounds offer a huge variety of surfaces and opportunities for horses to exercise. And in the bottom left-hand corner, again, you will see an uphill gallop. Uphill gallops are considered perfect for training racehorses. The picture in the middle is, you may wonder why I've got a saddle cloth. Well, that's a very important part of Japanese racing. At Miho, every single horse is identified by its age and the color of the saddle cloth, by its trainer in the number at the bottom, and by the horse itself, the other number, the 29. And every single piece of exercise at Miho is recorded, both in terms of sectional timing, the little tag on the side of the saddle cloth, and in filming. and all the details of training in Miho are made available to the Japanese betting public. Compare that with Newmarket, where whilst the training is on wide open heathland, nobody actually gets any details of what has happened, what weights the horses carried, the betting information, the information of the betting public is not there like it is in Japan. And the bottom right picture is also significant. It is in northern Japan, in Hokkaido. It is an exact replica of Warren Hill, built indoors by the Japanese to cope with the extreme weathers of winter. Moving on. If those two traditional or long-established training centres, the modern view is that you could combine racehorse training and training centres in one venue. These drawings are of a scheme that the Jockey Club, of a Jockey Club-led British racing consultation in Central Asia a couple of years ago. The idea, as I say, was to combine a training centre and a racecourse in a country that wished to expand its racing. The facilities included not only a grandstand, but also to the right of the grandstand, a hotel and leisure complex. To the left of the grandstand, at the end of the oval of the course, were concentrated the training yards, the veterinary facilities, a racing school, all the other facilities, welfare for the horse. In the trees around the racecourse, there were horse walks. And even in the top right, you could see its own Warren Hill, an uphill gallop, sorry, top right of the course, top left on the screen, an uphill gallop created specially for training purposes. One of the most important things in designing this complex was that it could get bigger. And whilst there was, you can see there's plenty of land that could be built and expanded as racing took hold in this country. Sadly, it is yet to be completed, but I look forward to going there when it is done. On the other hand, when you move to the next slide, you can see that one extraordinary training centre, which I'm sure many of you have visited, has been completed. My admiration for what the Hong Kong Jockey Club have achieved in Contour is absolutely, it couldn't be higher. They have literally sliced the top off a mountain and created the most modern state-of-the-art training facility anywhere in the world. It has everything that you could possibly conceive, including on the far left, an uphill gallop again. Get the hint. One of the most impressive features of Contour is the very high levels of biosecurity to ensure that no equine disease can get into the complex. And if ever there is a facility where the cares of the horse are better catered for in one coordinated way, I'd love to see it. This centre is the state of the art. The only thing it is missing is a grandstand. And if you look in the middle right of the picture, you can see where that will eventually be built. It has everything but the grandstand. So moving on from training centres to racecourses themselves. The key point of racecourse design is that it is a function of understanding what the many different customer groups who come racing want. If racecourses are correctly designed, they can succeed in both delivering a different set of customer experiences based around the same entertainment, namely horse racing, and other business outside of racing as well. This screen shows 3 different racecourses. At the top is Tokyo Racecourse in Japan, capable of holding 140,000 people, with a core audience that are dedicated bettors. They like their horses, they like their betting, they're very knowledgeable. As I showed in an earlier screen, they are very well informed. And this complex, this huge grandstand or 2 grandstands, has ample space to provide constant information for the racegoer on what they may wish to bet on next. The paddock is behind the stand because Japanese race fans like to see the horse. And it is designed in such a way, the stand is designed in such a way that as many as 25,000 people at one time can see the horses in the parade ring before the race, supported by a giant screen with all the up-to-date betting information for them to consider what they wish to bet on. Moving to the middle is another huge grandstand, Meydan in Dubai, a stunning achievement by Sheikh Mohammed. Meydan is designed more about the race and about hospitality. And in truth, it's only nearly full and not completely full on one night of the year. And if there's a salutary warning from Meydan, however magnificent the racecourse is don't build too big a grandstand if you're not going to fill it regularly. The racecourse is designed around hospitality and the spectacle of racing in front. The paddock is in front of the main grandstands with easy access for the sheikh's entourage to get in to see their horses before and after races. There is very little through flow within the stand because most of the facilities are geared towards hospitality. Down the bottom is Ascot here in the United Kingdom. Ascot rebuilt their stand a few years ago, and it is an achievement which everyone now loves here in England. Initially, racegoers didn't like it because racegoers got used to the old stand, but now it's appreciated for what it is, a racecourse where the crowd can freely flow. It's not stationary. They move through the stand to see the horses in the paddock, which is behind the stand, back through the stand to see the race. There are wonderful hospitality facilities higher up, but for the ordinary racegoer, there is a sense of occasion, a sense of style that meets the aspirational nature of the Ascot crowd. Not everybody wears a top hat at Royal Ascot, but everybody dresses up, everybody enjoys the occasion, as they do at all other race meetings at Ascot. And it's a stand that works. It's a stand where also a lot of care has gone into thinking what each of the different customer groups want. As much thought has gone into Ascot's public food offer as has gone into their excellent hospitality offer. They accept, using a word that Paul used earlier, that their racegoers are aspirational, and they accommodate that aspiration. Moving on, in accommodating aspiration, understanding what our customers want and helps us get the right revenue opportunities to earn money out of them. And the reality is, there's a marketing maxim that trying to be all things to all people is an impossible marketing maxim. But in reality, racecourses do a pretty good job at achieving what is meant to be impossible. Here are a selection of photographs which reflect what is required by the customer in different racing environments. On the top left is Seoul Racecourse in Korea, a racing environment that is predominantly male, predominantly about betting, and very little about food or other areas of expenditure. The main hall could be a railway station with ticket booths and electronic information of when the next train is about to depart. But actually, it's what the customer wants. It's easy access to get a bet on, having had a chance to study what the odds are on the screens above the betting booths. Again, it works for its audience. On the right is Saratoga Racecourse in America. American race fans are very casual, very informal. Their expectations about food are actually less than they are in Europe. They go to racing primarily to bet, but they would like an informal food and opportunity to spend money. And this is the main restaurant at Saratoga. Very popular, exactly what the racegoers want there. I don't think you can see a single tie in that picture. British racing is in 4 of the next 5 pictures. We have a huge range of what people wish. On the left, you can see some of the high-end food offer, some of the mid-range hospitality offer with the burgers. In the middle, the biggest pub in England, or biggest temporary pub in England, at the Guinness Village at Cheltenham. Sadly, it was empty this year, but last year it's a hive of activity where racegoers who may be in hospitality for some of the day would like to meet up with their friends who aren't there. And that's one of the key things about the racecourse, is the crowd is fluid. It's unlike going to football or rugby or tennis. The crowd is not sitting in one place all afternoon. It gives you a chance to think how you can earn money out of them. The picture on the middle right is York. Again, aspirational. This is not hospitality. This is where ordinary racegoers can go and eat and drink, overlooking the paddock. The picture at the bottom is not of a British racecourse. It's again my admiration for what Hong Kong has achieved, and how they too have understood the segmentation of their customers. Go racing at Sha Tin or Happy Valley, and the high-end catering for owners or on private boxes is absolutely superb. But on the ground level at Happy Valley, they also have a McDonald's, which caters to some of their younger audience. And it's only open 1 day a week. It's very good value. I understand it's subsidized, and it sells an enormous number of burgers every Wednesday night. But the young are also catered for in other ways at Happy Valley, with the Adrenaline nightclub, a way of encouraging aspirational younger racegoers with some money to get into the sport. And hopefully the members of Adrenaline will be the owners of the future in Hong Kong. Moving on, not all our customers are actually at the racecourse. And in fact, many more customers now are off the racecourse in their own homes or in betting shops. And broadcasting is a key revenue stream and key interest generator for our sport. In the United Kingdom, we're lucky. We have about 90 days of broadcasting on our main television channels. But over and above that, free-to-air opportunity for the public, there are 2 dedicated racing channels that only show horse racing. One of these channels is the Jockey Club is the biggest partner in. And we have developed with our other racecourse partners in RMG, a closed circuit or a pay-to-view television network that is incredibly popular in this country. And one of the benefits with Racing UK and with Sky Sports Racing, the other broadcaster, is that British racing is the only sport in this country where every professional moment is available on television for the fans to see. I don't think anybody can watch the whole lot, but it is there for people to see. Racing Media Group has also expanded internationally and is providing racing expertise now around the world. The bottom left-hand picture is our colleagues' broadcast center in the bowels of the big grandstand at Meydan. All of Meydan's horse racing, all of the broadcasting of it around the world is organized through Racing Media Group's expertise. The center picture is Dundalk Racecourse in Ireland. Again, all Irish racing is broadcast through our partners at RMG. I put a picture of a drone on the bottom right for 2 reasons. Drones are a wonderful way of bringing the sport alive to a fresh audience on television. The ability to create camera angles that previously could not be created ought to be exploited as best they can, provided it's done in a way that is safe to horses. When drones first started being used by television companies in England, there were 1 or 2 teething problems. And the BHA were very helpful in working with racecourses and TV companies and getting to a way that the television company's use of drones is now totally safe and does not interfere with the horses. There is, though, a word of warning about drones. British and Irish racing is increasingly finding trouble with unauthorized operators pirating pictures of our racing for their own benefit, probably selling them on to other people who can find improved latency and therefore take advantage and potentially affect the integrity of the betting on our sport, because these people have got an advantage in seeing the race over and above people who are watching on a satellite platform. Please beware of the drone threat when you're designing your racecourses in China. There's another reason why television coverage is so important. During the last year, as I think you know, nobody has been, or on very few occasions, have we been allowed to welcome the public onto our racecourses in the United Kingdom. But we have been able to continue to run the sport thanks to the work of the doctors at the British Horse Racing Authority and the horsemen who've kept their horses coming to race. And we've been able to broadcast our racing, both on our own channels and on the main ITV channel. And one of the benefits of COVID, if there is such a thing, is that our television audience, our off-course audience, has grown significantly in the last year. It's now down to our sport to get the new fans of the sport to actually come racing as we begin to reopen racecourses. Moving on, One of the challenges of Britain's racecourses is that very few racecourses race more than 40 days a year. And yet building our grandstands is a major capital investment. The new grandstand at Cheltenham, for example, cost £45 million. Cheltenham only races on 17 days a year. And it's not the only grandstand there. When designing our facilities at our racecourses, we are often designing in a compromise because we're designing both for race day use and also for use outside of race days. And the Jockey Club has hopefully learned from its experience as it's built more and more grandstands at our 15 racecourses. And if we are honest, we haven't always got it right. The top two pictures show the Millennium Grandstand at the Rowley Mile at Newmarket. This stand does work. It does work reasonably well for racing and for conference and events, but it doesn't work as well as we hoped. It has got too many compromises, and it is not perfect either for the racegoer or for the event organizer. On the other hand, the three pictures at the bottom show the Centaur building at Cheltenham that was opened in 2004. And interestingly, I think, this is the only stand I can think of in an English racecourse that was specifically designed for conference and events, with use on a racecourse then add in later. And this was because it was behind the main grandstands and didn't have a direct view of the sport. The Centaur can hold 2,250 people for a conference or 800 people for a dinner dance. But then on a race day, the middle picture, it can hold 4,500 people in an indoor arena that is full of atmosphere with betting, catering, live bands. And there are many racegoers who come to Cheltenham every race meeting now who never see a horse in the flesh themselves because they prefer to base themselves in the Centaur. Get your design right and you can have a success. Get your design wrong and you can find it's both expensive and difficult to put right. The Centaur was an opportunity because it was behind the action. And it's balanced, and it's also where the bulk of the conference and events business now happens at Cheltenham. And since it was built, a new grandstand, the Princess Royal Stand, was built with a wonderful view of the course. And our colleagues at Cheltenham were able to design that stand as a racing stand, not a compromise to conference events, because the conference and events were taking part in the other stand. Moving on. Racecourses are a huge part of their local community, and it shouldn't be underestimated how much that can help. A relevantly recent story is at Epsom Downs Racecourse, where they have two grandstands, again, one specifically designed with a large indoor hall for multiple use. For the past couple of months, that indoor hall has been one of the major vaccination centres here in the United Kingdom. Indeed, it was one of the original 5 that were first opened. Over 100,000 people have now had vaccines in the betting hall at Epsom Downs Racecourse. And my colleagues at the racecourse estimate that around 60 to 65,000 of those 100,000 have probably never been to the racecourse before. By being part of our community in this and in many other ways, we hope we can grow our audience and our fan base to come racing again in the future. And certainly my colleagues at Epsom believe they have tapped into the community in a way they've never succeeded before. Moving on to a quick summary. The key when designing racecourses and racehorse training facilities is to get the design right first, because it will be expensive to correct it later. When thinking of the horse, the horse needs tranquility, variety, and welfare, and designing the way that everything interrelates in a racehorse training centre is the way forward. When thinking of the racegoer and the racecourse, it's impossible to be all things to all people, and there are huge numbers of people who want different things from a day at the races. But understanding what each of your customer segment wants helps you influence the design to deliver and give them what they're after. And don't forget the off-course customer. There are many more off-course customers than potentially at the racecourse, and they could be a huge source of revenue for racing going forward. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to being able to answer any questions in due course.
Thank you, Stephen. Last but not least, today I would like to introduce Nick Craven. Nick is Communications Director at Weatherby's, the organisation whose name has been synonymous with horse racing for 250 years since 1770, and today incorporates banking and insurance services too. Nick, over to you.
Great, many thanks, Minty. Hi, everyone. Very nice to be able to talk to you today. Really appreciate the opportunity. I hope you find the next 15 minutes or so of interest. Weatherby's is a multifaceted business. We touch many corners of the industry. So I think there's something here for everybody. It's appropriate that I'm following the BHA and the Jockey Club with Stephen in the talk, because these are two businesses with whom we work incredibly closely and have had a relationship with for many years. I suppose it could be said that the Weatherby's is a sort of the birthplace of the thoroughbred, and I thought what might be quite fun, if you can see it on the camera, is to show the very first edition of the stud book. Now, it might not look like much, and it's seen better days, but this book is over 200 years old, and it's the foundation stud book for registers for the thoroughbreds. So whilst it might not look like much, it's a vitally important book, and probably in many respects it's the start point for the thoroughbred. So the General Stud Book, which this is the first edition of, it was first published in 1791 by James Weatherby, and it's been maintained and published by Weatherby's ever since. The next edition of the stud book will be published later this year. It's far bigger than this. It's about this wide, as you can imagine, with the number of horses it now has to carry. But anyway, I thought you'd enjoy that. Now, you won't want to listen to me for a full 15 minutes, I'm sure. So I thought it might be appropriate to play a short video for you, which gives you a bit more colour about Weatherby's. Hopefully this will come back a bit. Yeah, I'm going to show you a short video to start with, just to give you a bit more colour, as I said, about Weatherby's, and I'll go into some detail around the specific areas once you've had a chance to look at that. And as Paul said earlier, obviously happy to take questions after the presentation.
I keep fighting voices in my mind that say I'm not enough. Every single lie that tells me I will never measure up. Am I more than just the sum of every high and every low? Remind me once again just who I am, because I need to know. Ooh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. And you say I am held when I am falling short. And when I don't belong, oh, you say I am yours. And I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. I believe the only thing that matters now is everything you think of me. In you I I find my worth in you. I find my identity. Ooh, oh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. And you say I am held when I am falling short. When I don't belong, oh, you say I am yours. And I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. Oh, I believe. Taking all I have and now I'm laying it at your feet. You'll have every failure, God. You'll have every victory. Ooh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. You say I am held when I am falling short. When I don't belong, oh, you say I'm yours. And I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. I believe, oh, I believe, yes, I believe what you say of me. I believe.
I hope you enjoyed that. I haven't got to say anything now, but it gives you a bit of colour, a bit of interest, obviously. And as you can see from the short video, there's lots of Weatherby's that covers not only the thoroughbred industry but beyond as well. So just going back and as it says at the top of the slide, our history, a little bit of a history lesson, but hopefully an interesting one. So as the video said, that the thoroughbred was developed in the 17th and 18th century in England. And the start point for this was when native British mares were crossbred with imported stallions from Arabian, Barb and Turkmen breeding. So all modern thoroughbreds around the world now can trace their pedigrees back to the originally imported stallions into England in the 17th and 18th centuries. So you have the three key foundation stallions, as again was in the video, the Bali Turk, the Godolphin Arabian, and most importantly, the Dali Arabian were those foundation stallions. Now, during the 18th and 19th centuries, the thoroughbred spread through the world. 1730, they went to the United States of America, and then into Australia, obviously further into Europe, and into South America in the 19th century. There are millions of thoroughbreds around the world today. On average, about 90,000 thoroughbreds born throughout the world every year. So again, just carrying on that history lesson. So horses from the second half of the 18th century, the sport began to be properly organized and regulated. Horses raced in Britain, well, for hundreds of years actually before thoroughbreds, but it wasn't until the second half of the 18th century that the sport began to be regulated and organized. The Jockey Club, you heard from Stephen earlier on, was founded then, and the rules book were written, and classic races started to be run as well. Now in 1770, James Weatherby, the first Weatherby involved in the foundation of Weatherby's, was appointed as secretary to the Jockey Club, and a rather arcane title was also keeper of the matchbook and the stakes holder, looked after prize money and prize funds. So he placed him really at that point in the centre of things. And then from 1791, so obviously you haven't got to do maths too well to work out that 1770, last year was our 250th anniversary. So it was not the greatest year globally, but it was an important one for Weatherby's. But in 1791, James Weatherby published the first volume of the General Stud Book. That's the book I showed you a second ago. And it was really the first authoritative register of the thoroughbred. And as I said, it's remained in our care ever since. We still print a stud book now. They're far larger publications than they ever were. And obviously, you'll hear in my presentation that a lot of the world has been digitized. I think, as we say, people will be turning in their graves if ever the case came that Weatherby's no longer printed the stud book. So I'm sure for many years to come, the stud book will still be printed, albeit obviously the digital information is available as well. So if I move on to the work that the stud book do now, and as you'll see for the presentation, I'll cover a lot of the areas that Weatherby's touches, but as the stud book really is the foundation, the start point for Weatherby's, I'll start with the stud book. So the core functions for Weatherby's, as I said there, Ireland and Britain and Weatherby's manage the stud book in both countries. Combined would be the third largest foal crop around the world. So in America, you'll have just over 20,000 foals born every year. Australia would be the second largest foal crop. Then Britain and Ireland, and then other countries. Actually, Argentina would have a very large foal crop, but then obviously countries like France and South Africa. You can imagine, obviously, from the work we do, the number of horse records and people records that we have on the system is incredibly large. 2 million horses on the database. Obviously, records have been digitized here from 1990, but you can see them behind me. We have a huge library here of historic records as well. So if we want to go back further back than 1990, we obviously have the information here that we can research. So in terms of people records, the region of 180,000 individuals on our system. These are largely breeders, stud owners, mare owners, etc. And then obviously the all-important registration piece of our work, that's around the thoroughbred registration. So you've got all those foals being registered every year that I touched on, but also stallions are registered every year, mares are registered every year, and the vast majority of those, as you can imagine in this day and age, are done online. Now, the integrity of the information that we put in, that we use, is absolutely vital. Thoroughbreds, as I'm sure you're aware, are hugely valuable in many cases, but obviously in terms of competition and racing, as the BHA would have spoken about earlier, it's the identity, the integrity of the identity is absolutely vital. So what seems incredible for some people are the lengths we go to check identity of horses. So the horses obviously they have individual markings, whether it's on their face, on their legs, on their whirls, their colors. But more than that, we take their bloods. The bloods of horses are checked for parental verification. So you can check the identity of the horse's parentage, his father and his mother. And a horse is also, a thoroughbred is also microchipped. So every thoroughbred has a unique microchip number as well. The passport is issued. Now, the passport is a traditional document, albeit it's got watermarks on it. It's perforated for identity security. But these are documents, vital documents that move with the thoroughbred wherever the thoroughbred goes. So that takes me on to the next slide, which is the sort of the modern day stud book really, and what we're doing here. So I talked about the passport. Now, as it currently stands, the passport is a traditionally printed document, albeit with lots of security checks within it. Now, going forward, the next generation of X1 passports will be a Weatherby's e-passport. And this will be the world's first and only end-to-end digital system that delivers secure animal identification, validation, and authorization for identification. Now, more than that, it can do things like medications and vaccines. It can track the movement of horses and control ownership management as well. As you can imagine, it's a massively fast-moving world where we're living in, and digitizing this sort of facility is absolutely key. So the Weatherby's e-passport will shortly go live for all thoroughbreds born this year's foal crop in Ireland and in Britain. And these foals, as you can imagine, in 2 years' time, will go into the racing population. The functions of the e-passport have already had some use actually over the last year, and that really was in the use of managing medication and vaccine records for horses when we had our return to racing after racing was stopped because of COVID. On the return to racing, the e-passport and the vaccination app as part of it was used for checking vaccination records and horse identification on course. So whilst the full e-passport has only been rolled out now, certain elements of it have already been in play. So it's an exciting time for us as a stud book. Yes, we're a 250-year-old business, but using vehicles like this to push the business forward is absolutely vital. And having this information for use for governments and racing authorities and others is absolutely fundamental as well. I touch on genetics there as a final bullet point. Obviously, the work we do from a parental verification and the scientific piece I'll touch on later is vital. The e-passport obviously looks at the parental side of things, and from that point of view, we'll also look at genetics in breeding and other elements like that as well. So very appropriately, obviously, for the audience I'm talking to today, to you, the international piece of the stud book is vitally important. The International Stud Book Committee is a group of all 69 approved thoroughbred stud books around the world, and Weatherby's chair this group. Now, obviously, the stud books themselves, in terms of the different countries, they all come in different shapes and sizes. As I said, America would have the largest stud book authority and the largest foal crop. But you'll have a huge range of stud books in terms of size. You'll have countries like Finland will breed one thoroughbred every other year, but it's still a stud book authority, and it's one of, as I said, 69 stud books around the world, and we share that. The main roles for the International Stud Book Committee, obviously, the main one is to continually monitor, review, and improve standards for operating and maintaining the thoroughbred stud books. And obviously, there are guidelines for gaining and maintaining approval as a stud book. The most recent stud book to be approved was in Iran, and that was about 12 months ago. But as you can imagine, there are quite a few checks and balances you have to go through to get that approval. From a trade point of view, obviously, it's important to review and improve standards of breeding, identification for international movement for thoroughbred horses. And that's absolutely vital, again, appropriate for today for trade. Identity of horses and absolute surety of identity is absolutely vital, and that starts with the stud book. Future technologies, as I just talked about a second ago with the passport, future technology, things are always moving ahead. And we have to be moving with the times, whether it's through gene therapy, gene doping, we're keeping ahead of things like that. Because these can have huge effects on the integrity of the thoroughbred. And And obviously our job then as the International Studbook Committee is to agree and determine guidelines for the application of these checks and balances. Obviously we work incredibly closely with emerging studbooks. Countries who do want to become established studbook authorities, they will approach Weatherby's International Studbook Committee to get approval as a studbook. And as I said, they have to go through the various different checks and balances in order to get approved. But naturally, it's in everyone's interest to have as broad and wide involvement of the thoroughbred as far as we can. So we encourage new studbooks, but obviously we have the word checks and etc. in place. Moving on to my next slide. So you've heard from the British Horse Racing Authority this morning in the huge job that they do within the industry, and obviously they are the cornerstone for the thoroughbred industry in Britain. So Weatherby's our role is in terms of working with the BHA is to administer sort of day-to-day racing on behalf of the BHA and basically ensure it's smooth running 364 days of the year in the UK. And in simple terms, we do this providing administrative and data management services on behalf of the British Horse Racing Authority. Obviously, it's a job we've done well for centuries. We did it originally before the British Horse Racing Authority came into existence for the Jockey Club. So we've done it for many centuries, and obviously it's a job that we're proud to play our part with, and we try and do it with the highest standards of accuracy and fairness that, as you've hopefully heard from today, are the hallmarks of the British racing scene. The number of transactions and the many functions that we do within there are absolutely huge. As you can see, just a tiny number of them on the screen there. Whether it's naming horses, whether it's registering colours for owners, it's obviously entering races, declaring for races, sorting out prize money splits. There are so many parts to it, but hopefully it's a job that we do well and that I know is appreciated and that we enjoy being involved in. And again, alongside the studbook, I suppose you'd call our role in administering racing on behalf of the BHA one of the cornerstones. On to my next slide. So here you've had, if I can just outline again, you've had the two sort of cornerstones, the two pillars of the Weatherby's work. So that's the studbook, the origins of the business, and the racing administration part of the business. From there, obviously, we've spread into other areas of the thoroughbred industry. Really, I suppose these are very authentic areas to be involved in. And very relevant to our business. You know, we hold data, we manage data, we use data in lots of different ways, and we have relationships with every conceivable business, authority, individual around the thoroughbred world. So it makes sense for us to be able to spread our wings, and we have done that over many years. The first one I'll talk about now is and I think you'll probably find it quite interesting. It's obviously the pedigree side. It's not too far divorced, obviously, from the studbook side, which is a register and has a core function for registering thoroughbreds. This is potentially more interesting. It's the analysis of family trees of horses. So we would be the biggest pedigree researcher in the world. We would research pedigrees for horses being sold. So if all the sales houses in Europe, whether that's Tattersall's, Goff's, Osiris in France, Akana, even further afield in the Middle East. And we've even researched pedigrees for horses in Hong Kong for horses in training sale. So it's an important part of our business. We also, in association with the pedigree information, obviously, again, use that information for producing a range of publications. You can see on the graphic there, on the top left-hand corner, the Stallion book. Now that's a book for promoting stallions, promoting the popularity of a stallion in order that the mayors can choose which stallion they want to send their mares to. So that sort of information we make available to the industry. and it's vitally important. We also do a range of other bespoke publications for individuals. You'll have seen a shot through the video of these small bespoke private stub books, which are literally the books of the pedigrees for individuals. I think the camera was zooming in the video on Her Majesty the Queen's private stub book. There's obviously a digital element to this pedigree work. Everything I showed you on the previous screen largely printed, but that same information is available through countless online resources, Stallion Book Online, pedigree research online, pedigree options online. We have half a dozen probably websites where you can get this pedigree information, and it's used throughout the world. Again, something where we're using, it has an authentic association with our core role, but we have a sort of commercial outlet which is responsible for largely producing race cards in Britain, Ireland, and around the world. But alongside that, it's done lots of other things as well. You've got some shots there, even of a big tough rugger player. We do a lot of work in outside of just racing, in rugby, in football, in cricket, in powerboating, in cycling even. We have design and print and publishing capabilities. Talking about race cards there, but in truth, because of the issues with COVID over the last 12 months, we've had to move pretty fast in order to make the information that we've traditionally printed as race cards for racegoers on a race course to make them digital. So that sadly with racegoers no longer on course, they're now being able to look at, along with the racing through the TV, they're able to get a digital race card as well. And these are really smart things. These are traditional race cards as you'd see them, turn page digital cards, but with embedded video, embedded audio files, web links and everything else. So it's the next generation. Necessity, as they say, is mother of invention. I think we've found that particularly over the last 12 months with the digitizing of a lot of work that we've traditionally printed. So it's a nice area, it's a colorful area. And again, it has got an authentic connection with the work we do. Here's another interesting one, and you saw some screens on the video earlier. So so Weatherby's have a scientific laboratory in Ireland, in our office in Ireland. Again, the origins of that have really been around the work we had to do in checking the parental verification of thoroughbreds. So that's been done for 25 years now. So as I said, every thoroughbred, their parentage is verified using genetic work that we have. But beyond that now, we've taken huge steps into other areas as well. You can imagine, obviously, for thoroughbred owners, correct parental verification information is absolutely vital for breeding planning, ensuring integrity of the animals, etc. But we also do other work, pedigree searching, disease trait screening, even forensic testing. So lots of work in the equine space. I touched on very earlier the word genetics. Obviously, the thoroughbred is a closed herd, a closed breed. So naturally, there will always be an element of inbreeding around thoroughbreds. Now, our job, and a job that we're working on a lot with other laboratories around the world, is to try and gauge the potential problems of inbreeding, and see if there are other ways that we can manage that. So, whilst obviously the scientific work we've done from a core point of view is absolutely vital, moving on to parental to inbreeding issues and sorting out those is also massively important for the future. And then obviously it's bigger, in fact, than the equine work.
Sorry, Nick, we are aware of time.
Okay, I'll give you one more minute. So then you move on to other areas like the work we do for dogs and cattle and things like that, which are obviously another part of our business. And last one to talk about is the financial services side of Weatherby's, which is the bank and the insurance side of the business. Relevant to obviously the original role we had for Weatherby's, but now it's gone way beyond just horses now, and it's a proper bank and a proper insurance business as well. I rushed through those last two slides, and I hope I didn't overrun too much. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Nick. Well, that concludes today's webinar. I hope you found the various talks interesting and valuable. The team have been answering questions as we've been going along. If anybody has any further questions, please post them in the Q&A box now. And in the webinar part 2 tomorrow, we will give answers to these. We will see you back here for part 2 of the webinar event tomorrow at the same time. So thank you and good evening.